Jackie. Hi, I'm Kathy.
Chuck?
Terry. Cheryl.
Imagine a world where you have no electricity, no way to store food, and no means to cook the food you do have without the use of a fire. Imagine a life of living day to day and the continuous task of hunting and gathering to survive. Now imagine that the only transportation you have to take you from place to place is your own 2 feet. The things you're imagining were once what our lives amounted to. Hunting and gathering food and living day to day, with your biggest concern being whether or not you'd be able to feed yourself and your family for the day. Electricity is one of the greatest discoveries of mankind, yet millions of people take it for granted and barely give notice to how it is generated. The thought that it'll always be there so long as we pay our bills really kind of leads to why that taking it for granted just kind of happens. It's always there. But what happens when all the fossil fuels run out and the cold truth sets in? I mean, I've heard it said many times that necessity is the mother of invention. And even with the smallest possibility that one day coal and natural gas deposits will run dry, the world will need an alternative to meet the needs of the nations that have grown so dependent upon the use of these fossil fuels. Fossil fuels provide an abundance of energy, which in turn meets the needs of the world, but also helps to destroy the environment with the pollution that is produced from its consumption. Alternative energy is the solution to the problem surrounding fossil fuels, from the pollution to the possibility of an energy crisis that would be born out of the ashes of a depleted supply. For the world to address these issues revolving around the consumption of fossil fuels, the availability of alternative energy sources needs to be increased, as well as the research that creates new ways to harvest energy. Ultimately, an understanding of alternative energy and the benefits that it provides is needed to assist with the transition from a world dependent upon fossil fuels to a world that thrives on renewable and reusable resources. Fossil fuels are non-renewable and non-reusable resources that cause pollution with its consumption, and eventually, with the rate that the world consumes them, they will run out. Around the world, people have become dependent upon the use and consumption of fossil fuels in our day-to-day lives, whether it's power from coal-burning power plant to provide light and heat in our homes, or gasoline in our cars to go to and from the destinations in our lives. Fossil fuels have become a necessity for people to live in a civilized society. And with the numerous types of fossil fuels used around the world, from the coal that's burned to provide our heat and electricity, to crude oil that spills in the ocean, the pollution and damage to the environment just keeps building. And can you really heal a wound when you keep doing the things that caused it? How can the world recover from the damages of pollution if people of the world just continue to pollute it? Well, stopping the use of fossil fuels put the world into an energy crisis. Since their development, fossil fuels have met the energy needs of the world. And unfortunately, fossil fuels also create the negative effects on the environment. And the supply is dwindling due to the non-renewable nature of these forms of energy. Fortunately, there are many alternative sources of energy, and many that are already in use today, that help to lighten the burden that fossil fuels put on the environment. Some of these technologies have been in use for years, and unfortunately, the use of these technologies is not distributed widely enough to meet all of our planet's energy needs, mainly due to the continued use of fossil fuels. And now that we understand the effects fossil fuels have on the environment, and that the rate of consumption means that supplies will not last forever, let's look at the main causes of the problems associated with fossil fuels. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the burning of fossil fuels, which causes high carbon dioxide emissions, is considered to be a major contributing factor of global warming. Carbon dioxide also leads to the forming of carbonic acid, which turns the rain acidic. Acid rain, in turn, speeds up the process of erosion. And there are many other issues that revolve around fossil fuels concerning the environment. And some of the biggest concerns come from how these fuels are harvested or the methods companies use to retrieve and transport these fuels. An article in the Huffington Post written by Richard Steiner states that after seeking the approval to build the Trans-Alaska Pipeline back in the 1970s, government and industry promised that people of America that oil would be shipped safely from Alaska and not one drop would be spilled. There were to be double-hulled tankers and fail-safe tanker monitoring systems and state-of-the-art spill response capability. And of course, the government would keep a vigilant eye on the industry. But after getting the approval to build the pipeline, the big money began to flow, and all such promises were promptly forgotten. And on March 24, 1989, just minutes after midnight, the single-hulled supertanker, the Exxon Valdez, loaded with 1.3 million barrels of toxic Alaska North Slope oil, ran hard aground on a well-marked reef in Alaska's Prince William Sound, rupturing 8 of its 11 oil cargo holds, and causing at the time one of the nation's largest oil spills. And more recently, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill became one of the worst environmental disasters in history. According to the Coast Guard, the growing oil slick created a spill that was 45 miles wide at its broadest point and 100 miles long, which is roughly the length of New Jersey's coastline. These are just two examples of the numerous problems with fossil fuels, and oil is not the only cause of the problem. Natural gas is clean when burned and abundant in supply, but harvesting it takes its toll on the environment. Natural gas comes from shale rock deposits and is harvested by hydraulic fracturing. An article published in Time magazine entitled "The Gas Dilemma," it was stated that hydraulic fracturing is done by drilling a well deep underground and then turned horizontally into the shale rock layer. And then charges are detonated to fracture the shale, and a mixture of water, sand, and chemicals are then pumped into fissures at high pressure to get the gas to flow back up the well, along with the wastewater. The wastewater in which this can pollute the water table and the drilling zone, and it causes instances where the drinking water and stuff like that in areas has become contaminated with the natural gas. And it's not, so far hasn't been proven that it's poisonous for people to drink, but it can become flammable, which would be a pretty big hazard for, say, the fire department trying to put out a fire. You know, I'd hate to hose down a fire with contaminated water that bursts into flames. You know, alternative energy is a clean and cheap solution to the major demands of the planet's energy needs. And with global warming becoming a concern, the rising oil prices, people are starting to realize the consequences of their actions, causing many people and companies alike to take the leap of faith and switch to alternative methods for the way that their day-to-day lives function, and with alternative energy becoming a large part of that leap of faith. And according to an article published by the University of Utah, alternative energy is an umbrella term that refers to any source of usable energy intended to replace fuel sources without the undesired consequences of the replaced fuels. And with the demand for fossil fuels becoming higher than the rate of production, and with the possibility that all sources of fossil fuels would become exhausted, alternative energy is the only real reason to avoid possible energy crisis in the future. Alternative energy is the way to meet the growing energy needs that have been created by the massive dependence on fossil fuels all over the world, which cripples the environment, and governments all over the world need to embrace and encourage the use of new forms of energy and supply aid to those who seek to develop new ways to harvest energy. The government also needs to take advantage of all the government-owned land that can sustain the many different forms of alternative energy, such as hydroelectric dams, wind farming, solar power, geothermal energy, and the other forms of clean energy. State or local governments can assist with the transition from fossil fuels also by encouraging the use of alternative energy by supplying tax breaks on properties who implement alternative energy sources, such as installing wind turbines or solar energy, solar panels and such to your homes. The biggest step to solving these problems is people, the individual like you and I, making the choice to recycle or to install our solar panels on our homes, and possibly even installing these turbines on our properties to create a renewable and self-sustaining home that does not rely on power from the outside world. The decision to turn off our lights in rooms that aren't occupied, just that alone has the ability to save thousands of kilowatt hours of energy and save tons of coal per year if everyone did just that. Today we look at how fossil fuels provide energy and meets the needs of the world, and how it helps to destroy the environment. We can now see that someday this non-renewable resource will run out, and the alternative energy is a solution to the problems surrounding fossil fuels. We've analyzed some of the problems surrounding the consumption of fossil fuels, and we've come to realize that solutions to both pollution as well as possible energy crises, when supplies of fossil fuels run out, can be found with an alternative energy source. The problem surrounding energy consumption affects everyone. Fossil fuels may still be in large supply today, but what happens when they run out? How can civilization continue to thrive as it does now without the use of alternative energy? And I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor for some Q&A.
Great.
I have a question. I'm Cheryl. How long do we have to use the fossil fuel that we're using today before it will be required to use alternative energy? In my lifetime?
Honestly, the consumption, the rate at which we consume it, there's enough fossil fuels left in the world. You won't see the effects of it in your own lifetime, and possibly not even those of your grandchildren, but within the next 100 years or so, the next century or so, you're going to start seeing a lot of those effects. So it'll be your great-grandchildren that are going to be experiencing these effects. But if we make that transition now and start working towards setting up all these other wind turbines, the wind farms and solar power and all these other natural resources that are available to us, then there won't be such a struggle or an energy crisis when that time comes. But no, in the foreseeable future, you're not going to experience anything that's going to be, sorry, there's no more oil left in the world. That's not going to happen.
Thank you. And my name's Jackie, and I would like to know why the government isn't working on this quicker. And maybe we should have each state be in charge of their own wind fuel and stuff.
Well, there's a big part of geography that is involved with that, and I'm sure you've seen up, especially like near where you live, I believe near like Ellensburg, there's some wind farms over in that area. And one of the biggest states is California for wind farming, which back in the 90s, they actually covered about 90% of the wind energy produced in the world. They had around, I think, 117,000 wind turbines in California alone. The government does really attempt to make better use of its places, and they do implement things. I mean, the Grand Coulee Dam, the Hoover Dam, these things were all built by the government, especially the Hoover Dam, which was built by the WPA back in the late 40s during World War II, or just before, during the Great Depression. And there's a lot of these things that the government does implement, but their resources are kind of limited. And the biggest thing with alternative energy is what the individual can do. I mean, switching to solar power in your home and stuff like that will really ease up on the consumption of other fossil fuels from, say, the coal power plant that's powering everyone else's home in the area. If everyone switched to adding solar to their house, you'd cut down on that consumption.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.